Hi, welcome to City Scene with Mayor Mike Cahill. I'm your host, Walt Kosmowski. And the first thing I want to do is welcome Mayor Mike to the show. Mike.
Hi, Walt. Thanks.
Welcome. And I know that you have brought two very special guests with you today for our topic discussion. And let me introduce them. First is the Essex County District Attorney, Jonathan Blodgett. Welcome.
Thank you.
And the second one is our police chief, Beverly's police chief, John LeLacheur. John, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
And the topic today that we're going to be discussing is drug addiction, alcohol addiction. There's been a lot in the news about opiates recently, and we want to talk about the effects that these things have on our communities and what our communities are doing in response to that. And maybe, Mike, to frame kind of our discussion, maybe you could give us an overview. What is the nature of the drug and alcohol problem on the North Shore and specifically in Beverly?
Sure. I think a lot of that can best be answered by the district attorney and the chief. But if I could just frame what we'll be talking about. You know, there is not a community in the world that isn't touched by drugs. Every single neighborhood in the world, every single high school in the world, there are individuals using and abusing drugs. We all know, every single one of us know the face of drug addiction. Every one of us know lives that have been impacted or in many cases destroyed by drugs. So it's something we just have to pay attention to, and we have to do a better job of addressing. There's a stigma that comes with addiction, and I think for a long time that's kind of kept people from looking straight in the eye the problem and trying to attack it. So what we've done is the city has partnered with the DA's office, and we're working with the DA, with our health system, Leahy North, and their behavioral health arm, with the chief and the police department, with our school department, and a lot of other community partners to try to make a difference on a number of fronts. And I think, again, it's probably best to let the experts here talk about that.
Well, with that said, maybe I'll start with DA Blodgett. Maybe you can kind of give us an overview of what the drug problem is here on the North Shore today in our society.
Well, it's an extremely serious subject matter, and one that I have been speaking about as vocally as possible since 2003 when I became district attorney. I think the most important statistic that I can give to the viewers and for us to discuss as a panel is that in 2013 we had 66 reported opiate deaths, opiate Class A, heroin, Oxycontin, drugs of that nature. 66 reported, and I suggested it was higher than that because sometimes they're classified as organ failure, etc. But 66 reported opiate overdose deaths. Last year, in 2014, 145. We're already on pace this year to break that record. At my last count, and I get pretty much real-time statistics from the state police, when they come to a scene and see paraphernalia and things of that nature. So their figures are fairly accurate. We're over 45 already for this year. So we'll, sadly, perhaps break last year's record. So that, in and of itself, that statistic is something that the public should know is truly alarming.
Yeah, that's staggering, isn't it? Yeah, Chief, do you want to tell us, focus in a little bit more on Beverly? Tell us what the nature of the problem is here right in our hometown.
Well, again, we're not immune from this. In the month of March, we had 3 heroin overdose deaths. And luckily we had some saves from the use of Narcan. The ambulance attendants were able to save people. It's a very, very serious issue, and sometimes it's glossed over because it's unfortunately becoming so commonplace now that people are forgetting that there are people dying in this city all the time, and as they are through the Commonwealth and through the country.
Now, Attorney General Blodgett, I know that your office focuses a lot on information, providing information, education as part of prevention efforts that you disseminate to youth and to parents. Tell us a little bit about that approach.
Sure. When I have the opportunity to speak to young people in different schools in the county, which I do quite often, I try to impress upon kids that if you go down the path of heroin use or other illicit drugs, particularly heroin though, if you go down the path of heroin use, only 2 things are going to happen to you. One, you're either going to die, or secondly, you're going to go to jail. There's no in between. And the hope is that you help young people at an early age make good decisions. We try to help the school systems. We're there to supplement their efforts, not supplant what they do, but I'm a firm believer you have to get to kids in the 5th grade. 5th grade is when kids become socially conscious, they become aware of themselves, they become aware of choices, and we do our best to give the information to them and also to their parents, so their parents can have that discussion at home that is so, so critical, so the kids will understand both the dangers and why it just isn't a choice they should make. It's a bad choice, and we want kids and people in general to make good choices, because when it happens, Walt, when you have someone who is caught in the throes of addiction, it's just not the person who becomes addicted, it's the entire family, and in many ways the whole community that suffers the consequences.
And if we look at that, John, when you say 5th grade, you're talking about 10-year-olds, are you not?
10 to 11-year-olds, correct.
Which is astounding that it would start that early. And let me
just
sure.
throw in not so much from the drug angle, but I taught middle school for years. Middle school kids are the joiners of the world. They desperately need to belong. That's an age when they're figuring things out, and I think that's a part of why the vulnerability at that age is so great. Is that a fair statement?
Sure. Yeah. They become very, very socially conscious. They are more in tune with the world than we give them credit for. And the experts in the field, the people I've talked to, the doctors, the people who are educators, will tell you that that's the time to grab kids if you can, because of their inquisitive nature. So.
And Chief LeLacheur, being that it does start in the schools very often, tell us about some of the efforts that the Beverly Police Department is doing. I know you have officers who are liaisons in the schools. Tell us a little bit about what your approach is to get to these kids early.
We're trying to expand that also. We've been working in the neighborhoods a lot. We have one school resource officer for all the schools in the city, which it's very tough for that officer to get to every school and work with every buddy in those grades up to high school. So I'm having the community impact officers make appearances also and start to talk with the kids, just try to sit down and have lunch with them so they understand that we're there as a resource for them to help them. But the schools right now have comprehensive programs on health and drug abuse and drug usage, and we're supporting those efforts, and maybe in the future with some other grants that are coming up, some other educational money that will come forward, we can get more involved directly with the children in the schools.
Sure, sure. Now I'm going to ask a question to the both of you. What are kind of the warning signs? What are the pathways to addiction that you see? What are the warning signs that parents and educators, teachers should be looking for? John, I'll start with you.
Sure, and that's a great question for both myself and the Chief to answer. I would suggest to you, based on my talking to parents who've gone through this terrible ordeal, it's just the change in behavior of their child, the sullenness that comes upon them, the change in clothing, change in friends. They're oftentimes they're not the child that the parent knew. They're not the child that the parent had such great hopes for, because they're starting to suffer those throes. So parents who know what their kids are doing, and as they should, see that change in them, or they see drug paraphernalia or something of that nature, they've got to call their doctor. They've got to get help right away. But it's just the change in your child's attitudes, interests, likes, friends, and the Chief can pivot off of that, what he sees in the final result.
Yeah, it certainly changes in behavior, but the parents have to, and I'll throw this out as a parent, the parents have to parent. Their children in middle school and high school don't need friends. They have plenty of friends. They need parents. And they have to become involved in what the kids are doing. They have to know where they're going, who they're hanging out with, but also warn them. Don't leave an unattended drink. Know who you're going to be with. Let us know where you're going to be. I mean, I was at a conference yesterday with the district attorney, and I made a comment to my wife last night how my daughter's 26 and we still want her to text us when she gets home, and she's living in another state. So, I mean, we still are very involved, and I think that that's a very important thing. They have to be involved. They have to monitor what they're doing. And it's unfortunate that if they have a suspicion, if they have an older relative in the house or in another house that a teenager is going to, check their medications, make sure their medications are hidden, because we talk about the pathway. Sometimes it starts with the legal drugs that are prescribed to people that are misused by others.
I've heard it said that if a parent discovers something like this, chances are that it's been going on for a while already. Is that, can you comment on that, Attorney General?
I think that's a fair assessment, that it's very rare that the first time a child gets involved or experiments that the parent finds out about it. It's probably not the first time. And again, it's noticing the changes in their child, noticing the changes in what they're doing and who they're with, as the chief said. And it's so important that immediately they reach out and get help from a doctor or even the police. I have to say, the chief is a terrific communicator with me in my office, and we always try to get a child or a young person into drug diversion or into drug court, so that early on can hopefully break the cycle and help them make, because again, it's all about making good decisions. That's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to hurt anybody. There's a different way we approach a convicted drug trafficker and a person who's made a conscious decision to sell drugs for profit, to create human misery and destroy neighborhoods bit by bit. I am unrelenting in my efforts in that regard. But with kids make mistakes. We understand that. And we're not going to charge or be draconian with a child who's got a possession issue, an addiction. We want to do everything we can, and we do, in terms of options to get help, whether it's, again, drug diversion or it's drug court.
Yeah. John, what should parents, what very specific things on a day-to-day basis should parents do? What would you advise them to do to either discover if there's drugs being used, or even after, if they find paraphernalia?
Well, again, there has to be rules in the home, and they have to make the kids follow the rules. And parents have the absolute right to check their phones, to check their accounts. They're minors, they're living in their houses, and again, this is getting back to the whole idea of parenting. It's not spying, it's parenting. And you want your children to have a fulfilled life, and you have to catch problems now. I mean, I talk to parents all the time of older adults or older teenagers that have been in problems and gone through rehab and continue into the problem. And what happens is they understand that it's a disease of addiction, but what I try to tell them, but you have to realize that they are still victimizing others. They're breaking into cars to get money for drugs. They're breaking into homes and stealing to get money for drugs. So I understand they have a problem with their addiction, but they're also victimizing others.
Now, I'm going to ask both of you the same question. There's a lot said these days that the drugs of today are much more powerful, much more dangerous than they might have been a few years ago. Maybe if you could comment and let our viewers know just exactly what the situation is with regard to the power of those drugs.
Sure. I mean, that's an absolute truth. That's an unfiltered reality. The THC in marijuana is much higher today than it was in the 70s. A lot of parents will say, well, I smoked some marijuana when I was a kid, but the marijuana today is much stronger than it was in the past. I've talked to my counterparts in Quebec who will tell you that the hydroponic marijuana that's made artificially is made for that reason. It's extremely potent. The heroin is incredibly pure, much more pure again than a generation ago. We know of many examples of somebody trying heroin for the first time and dying. And again, that's because of the purity, and it's an attempt to cause more addiction, to get more people buying the drugs. So the drugs absolutely are much more potent than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago, and that's a major concern. A major concern, because for many people, look, we're all wired differently. Yeah. But for many people, they will tell you when you sit and talk to them, as I have, it was the first time I did heroin. Wow. It was the first time I did this. It was, my smoking pot, all the time when I was a kid or a teenager. And the other thing too, and I know the chief agrees with me, the younger kids start doing drugs, it's a medically proven fact. The higher their risk to become drug addicted as they become adults. Yeah. But the drugs absolutely are higher in potency than before. And it's very easy to ascertain. So many websites, you go in Harvard Medical School, the experts in the field, Dr. Nora Volker and others talk about how powerful and how dangerous and life-altering the drugs are today.
Yeah. Chief, can you comment on from your experience being right on the street there, what are your officers, what do you see on the street with the power of these drugs?
Again, I echo what the district attorney is saying about the strengths. I'm hearing cases from the Drug Enforcement Administration of overdoses now of marijuana out in Colorado and in Oregon because of the use of marijuana oil, which is very pure, and people are actually overdosing from it. So marijuana is not the safe social drug that it was thought to be 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's changing. It's not a pharmaceutical grade drug, the same with heroin. People don't know what they're getting. When a lot of the overdoses we're finding nowadays, the cut of heroin could be with fentanyl, which is a very, very deadly drug, very powerful pain medicine. And again, the availability of narcotics today is something we didn't see years ago. OxyContin, again, we made an arrest recently where a person came up dealing OxyContin out of Boston, and they're just getting multiple prescriptions through multiple doctors from friends and selling it. It's just the problem that is people get hooked on the OxyContin and they go to the cheaper heroin. And the heroin, again, it's not made in a pharmacy. Mm-hmm. No one knows who's making, who's cutting, what they're even putting into it for fillers. And these are where the deaths are occurring from.
Yeah. I'd like to go back to something that you said, John Blodgett, about a lot of people you encounter say it's their first experience with a drug. And there's a lot of comment that certain drugs, for instance, like marijuana, is considered kind of a mild, it's not really a hard drug. What has been your experience with how people might progress? Can you smoke marijuana, small amounts of it, and then completely quit? Or what's been your experience on how people start and where they end up?
Well, I feel this extremely strongly, and it's not very popular in some quarters, but I absolutely believe that marijuana is a gateway drug. Yeah. Now, having said that, does that mean that everybody who smokes marijuana will go to heroin? No, it doesn't. As I said a moment ago, we're all wired differently. But I've yet to talk to somebody fighting the throes of heroin addiction, which is a lifetime battle, who didn't tell me they started with marijuana. And that's a fact. I just think that, again, we can't do anything in this fight unless we get the facts out to people to help make good informed decisions. But absolutely, without question, heroin addicts will tell you they started with marijuana, it wasn't enough, and they went on further, to the harder drug.
Right. Now, we've been, let's talk about, when we talk about addiction, we talk about everything from opiates to marijuana to alcohol. We're not really restricting our discussion here to any particular substance, or tell us about the range of things that kids, because I know that they can sniff glue and paint thinner, and there's all sorts of things that kids do to get a high. Maybe you can comment on that.
Well, kids are kids. Kids are going to experiment. That's just part of, the way we're all made. That's part of our DNA. Sure, whether it's marijuana, cocaine, ecstasy, bath salts, God forbid the crystal meth comes to this area, it hasn't yet. There's a whole range of drugs that people will, I think, try to use or experiment with. So we're not fighting the battle just on one front. The heroin battle right now, that addiction that we're trying to deal with, is what I think has everybody's attention, and rightfully so, because of the increased number of deaths that has of all of us in society alarmed. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. Chief, how much do you find among kids is stuff that they concoct on their own, like with glue or different things like that, and how much is stuff that they've gone out on the street and bought from dealers or other kind of connections?
Well, again, addiction of any type is dangerous, whether it's alcohol or illegal medication that's overused or an illegal drug. But huffing and things to that effect gone on for years. But the danger is the damage that's done to the brain is incredible. It's one of those things that if you sniff glue or paints for vapor effect, it immediately damages the brain cells. I mean, it's why people would do it is beyond us. Why do people think of doing it to try to get that high? It doesn't make any sense when you think about it, but it goes on. Yeah. And it's the first time you do it, you're causing damage. The same thing with marijuana, and again, we're talking about people as they're developing. They're not fully developed, until you're well over 18, your brain and your body. And by using these drugs, you're causing damage to yourself.
Yeah. In the marijuana front, I wanted to add this, because the chief had mentioned, Colorado. It's a real problem, and I applaud our new Attorney General, Maura Healey, because she is very much opposed to legalization of marijuana. And part of it's because she talked to her counterpart out in Colorado. I was there in July. I spoke at length with the Denver District Attorney, and he would tell you this, that Denver's become a mecca for teenage homeless girls, that the rates of sexual assault against those teenage girls has risen. Animals are marijuana sick, particularly dogs. The tax revenue that was promised has not come to fruition. The hash oil that the chief mentioned earlier, people blowing up their homes trying to make hash oil. I mean, it has been a real problem. It's not been a panacea at all for society. But more importantly, on the marijuana debate that rages on and on and on, I say to different people I speak to, if marijuana was so harmless, why hasn't the American Medical Association or the Massachusetts Medical Society endorsed it as a harmless drug? Because they haven't, and because they've stated it is not.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about how the availability of these drugs, the drug dealers, the drug pushers, who are they? How do they come into a community? How can you identify them, if at all? If you can't, maybe I'll turn to the chief first on this one.
Well, this is where we talk about regional efforts. It comes in not through the Commonwealth. It's coming from Florida, through Texas, through Mexico, through Canada, and it finds its way down through dealers, the larger to the smallers. And what we end up doing is basically we're dealing with the smaller users or the smaller dealers and work our cases backwards. So as it comes in heavy, we have to go at it back that way. And we find it coming in from the largest cities around us, other states around us, and all we can do is by combined efforts between the federal government, the DEA, the state, Massachusetts State Police drug units, and their detectives working with my detectives, and then we work with the other local cities and towns in the area. We build up intelligence, we build up cases. And our goal is to take the smallest case we can, and again, whether the district attorney decides they want to prosecute or not, we've still gathered evidence in that case. We'll use that evidence to a coordinated effort through other agencies to build further evidence. And what it does, it whittles down to one or two people. And that's our ultimate goal. If we can take off the major large distributors, it's going to hurt the flow. Is it going to stop it? No. I mean, it's a huge problem. But we're going to attack it from the local level to the state level to the federal level.
Yeah. Now, that's a very interesting point you bring up, and maybe I'll turn to Attorney General Blodgett on this one. When you encounter people either using or dealing with drugs, what options as law enforcement officers do you have, and what determines whether you'll prosecute or arrest, or what are the options there?
I think it's really important, Walt, that people understand that in the criminal justice system, we treat people who are drug addicted, people who are charged with possession in a completely different fashion than the persons or people who are, again, trafficking in illegal drugs for profit to create more human misery and, again, start to whittle away at our neighborhoods bit by bit. So there's a completely different way they're approached. And I mention that because there's a big effort right now, a lot of talk about eliminating mandatory minimum sentences for in drug cases. And the proponents, I think, have to be a little more honest about how we approach that. I think that district attorneys statewide are pretty good about distinguishing, again, between the addict and someone who needs help, who would be a candidate suitably for drug diversion or drug court, and the person, again, who's selling the drugs a major weight. And that's how we approach what we do in our job. So I don't think now is the time, given the crisis we're facing in Massachusetts and in the Northeast and nationwide in terms of the opiate overdose deaths, to make life easier for drug traffickers. The mandatory minimums are to go after, again, the people who are peddling the poison on our streets. And I think that's an important distinction for the public to know. Our prison population is declining. That's a stated fact. The new Secretary of Public Safety, Dan Bennett, testified last Thursday at the Wednesday in West Boylston in front of the House and Senate Ways and Means Committee, that there are 1,000 jail cells empty this year from last year. He's closing Bay Colony, which is the Norfolk State Prison, because there are so many beds that are available, and wants to turn that into an area for, say, inmates who have Alzheimer's, et cetera. The point being that we do a good job, I think, going after the real bad people and do our best to show compassion and reality for the person who's suffering from addiction. And that's an important distinction. As I said earlier, the chief would speak to me mindful about somebody who's been affected by that, but we want to target, we want to get the people who are the drug traffickers. And why is that? Because it's, for them, low risk or low enough risk and high reward, and that needs to change.
Yeah. Now, we were, recently there's been the very high-profile deaths of Robin Williams and so forth, and what's that other actor, I forget what his name is, the blonde guy. Hoffman, was that, yeah.
Philip Seymour Hoffman.
And, yeah. And so, has this been a problem before, or is it just because these high-profile people are in the news that the focus is on that now, or has it always been like that? What do you attribute that to?
Well, I think there's been a cycle. If we remember back in the late 80s and early 90s, crack cocaine became the large issue we dealt with, and heroin kind of fell off a little bit. Now that has changed again because of the pricing. Again, heroin is so much cheaper, and it's coming back as a drug of choice. But unfortunately, because it's so powerful and deadly, that it cannot always be controlled. And again, even in cases where there's an overdose, the person using doesn't know what they're getting. Again, like I said, this is not made in a pharmacy where it's a specific grade of a drug. They're getting fentanyl, they're getting other cuts, or they're getting pure heroin. They don't know what they're getting, and they're overdosing.
Yeah.
So whether we're using it recreationally and they died of the overdose, or they committed suicide as an overdose, there are many different causes to that and why it's done. But again, it's a huge problem that's coming back, and we're going to do everything we can to stop it.
So what specific things are we doing in Essex County and in Beverly to keep drugs from infiltrating in? What sorts of strategies do you have for that?
Talk about the MOPSI grant?
Well, we have one project we're working on now. It's a grant that was developed between Gloucester, Danvers, and Beverly. Mm-hmm. It's a three-pronged attack on illegal drug usage. It's education, to getting into the children, the preventions, and then an enforcement level to that. So we're going to be working with Gloucester Police, Danvers Police, in a regional effort to, find people who are buying and selling. Again, looking at the dealers, and then working those cases back to, whether they lead us to Boston or Lynn or Lowell or Worcester or whatever they may take us, and then through our friendships and our partners with the state and other counties, we can make bigger, cases and continue to take off the major dealers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But again, as part of that, and one thing I want to get in is I'm thinking before I forget, and especially with younger kids, there's this misconception that they can smoke marijuana and drive cars because they're not drinking alcohol, they'll be fine, they're controllable. It slows your reflexes, it inhibits your ability to drive, and if you're stopped and you're under the influence of marijuana, you will be arrested, you will be charged. It has the same penalties as driving under the influence of alcohol. Again, this is a misnomer. You can smoke marijuana and drive a car. You cannot, and we will prosecute and arrest you and prosecute you for that offense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And speaking of the misnomer, the chief brought up an example that I was not going to discuss, but let me tell you that it's very common when we have an arrest for impaired driving that the person was both smoking marijuana and drinking. I've heard people say, well, I'd rather have my child smoke marijuana than drink. Well, I think the reality is many of the impaired driving arrests involve somebody who was doing both.
Yeah. Now, I understand, and maybe Mike, you've been kind of quiet back here. Mm-hmm. There's an event coming up May 6th that has to do with the topic that we're talking about, and I know that you three gentlemen will be there, and some of the Beverly Beverly School District leaders. Maybe, Mike, do you want to tell us about what's going on?
Sure, I would. With the district attorney has been an incredible leader in this area for some time. And we have put together a local task force and are trying to, I think, recreate locally what he's doing regionally, and that is to do as much as we can with our community as a whole, but with an initial focus on our young kids and their parents around education and prevention. We don't want kids to fall prey to drugs. We want to do everything we can on that front. When we find people who are using drugs and are in the throes of addiction, we want to get them help. When we find people who are dealing, we want to arrest them and prosecute them. So that's the kind of the complete focus. On the education and prevention front, our school district is putting together really a 2-year kind of rolling curriculum of both programming and special events. So some is curriculum in the classroom, some are events. This is really an initial event on May 6th where we're inviting all middle school and high school students and their parents to the Beverly High Auditorium. So it's May 6th, 6:30 p.m.
6:30, okay.
Really the featured speakers will be the district attorney, the police chief, and we've got a couple of medical professionals, one from Children's Hospital in Boston, one from Leahy North Behavioral here to talk, in a complimentary fashion. They're not going to all repeat the same things. We're going to cover a lot of the different issues that parents need to hear when it comes to drugs. You guys want to add to that?
I think it's great, a great nod to the mayor. It's important. I never say no to these types of efforts. I think it's important. It's really important. And for people who can't make it, I hope they all come out in mass, May 6th. On our website, we have a program called Choose to Refuse, which we had developed back in 2005 and 6, which we offer to the schools, but it's called Choose to Refuse.
Choose to Refuse.
You can go on the website, look at it, parents can look at it, and hopefully there's something in that will help them have that discussion with their children. There is no substitute in anything in life than parents who are involved.
Yeah. John, tell us, what is the website again now?
It's the office website, mass.gov, go to Essex DA, and you can see the link, the programs we have, and Choose to Refuse is on there, and it explains the program. And we will come out to the community. We will go to the schools when asked and use that. It's a very easy teaching technique, and it talks about the dangers of drugs.
So May 6th, and do we know what day of the week that is?
I believe it's a Tuesday.
Tuesday, okay, and 6:30 in the Beverly High School auditorium. Okay, very good.
So let me just add to that, Walt. This is a problem. It's a huge problem. But we're trying to focus on all that we can do. Chief talked about the overdose deaths that we've seen in Beverly in the last couple of months. A 26-year-old, an 18-year-old, a couple of people in their 30s. All ages, drugs can take and they can steal. They can steal these people away from us who mean so much and who have so much to offer. But we can fight back, and with education, we can prevent a lot of kids from ever picking up and falling prey. And with the right treatment and the right, the district attorney using his discretion, we can get people into treatment and into help. Now, we also know that the governor has set up a similar task force at the state level, and we're trying to take some of what we're learning as we look locally at the resources and the needs. And one of the things we'll do is go to the governor's task force with some of our local thoughts and recommendations, because we do know that on the treatment front, that is, there's a whole continuum of treatment that people need if they're going to beat addiction. And we know that locally, regionally, and nationally, we don't have enough resources in treatment. So, but I think we can make a difference. I know we can, and we're going to do everything we can to make people safe, both in Beverly and throughout the region.
Now, is there, if parents feel that their children are using, or if you see someone using, is there a hotline, or if you think you see a drug deal going down on the corner, should you just call the police, or is there a certain hotline, or what?
If anybody ever sees a crime in progress, or even a suspected crime, we just ask them to call the police station. They can call the business number. If they don't know that, they can dial 911, and we'll certainly investigate it. Again, one thing I do want to do is I want to commend my officers, the patrol division, the detective division, for the work that they've done. Over the past few months, we've striven to be more visible in the communities and visible on the streets, and everyone's doing a tremendous job. And I think we've made a lot of arrests. We're going to continue to do so. We're going to be more aggressive. And one last thing, if it doesn't get mentioned, is we do have a drug drop-off box in the lobby of the police station for any unused medications. We ask people to bring it in. If you have stuff that you were prescribed, you're not going to use it, get rid of it. If you have relatives that have prescribed drugs, bring them in, get rid of it. And we also have a shops box now for needles. If we can get them off the street, dispose them properly, it may help somebody in the future.
Very, very good. Yeah, that's great. Now, what I'll do in closing here, I'll give each of you a chance to kind of give a little summary of what you think are the most important things we've talked about, and what you would like to leave our viewers with. And maybe I'll start off with you, John, and go around this way.
Sure. Well, thank you, Walt and Mike and John, for allowing me to come today to have a direct conversation with the residents of Beverly. I think it's awareness. I think it's truly awareness, talking to your kids, offering assistance to a child, a nephew, a neighbor's child, understanding that there's no shame involved in this. When I first became district attorney, I think the big stigma was the shame. And we broke through that wall, that it can happen to anybody. It can happen to families that have economic means and that don't. It can happen in an urban setting and a rural setting. I've seen it through all the 34 cities and towns in Essex County. Last year, we had an opiate-related death in some fashion, either a death or an arrest or somebody who was related to somebody in every single city and town in this county.
Wow.
And that's unacceptable. And we're only going to beat this if we do this together.
Yeah. Thank you very much. John?
If parents are reluctant to call the police, we ask them to go to their schools, go to their guidance counselors, get them involved. They'll certainly set up the proper counseling and treatment. If they need to call us, we'll certainly do whatever we can to help them out. But there's always a lot of other resources out there, whether it's, again, the religious communities, the different hospital settings, the doctor's offices, and the schools. Reach out to those people, get the proper counseling, get the proper help now before it becomes a serious problem in the future.
Thank you. Mike?
And I'll echo that. Leahy Health is training a lot of our school personnel at the moment to be able to assess and refer to treatment individuals who are in crisis. One of the adjustment counselors at Beverly High School is specifically trained and designated to work with anybody who presents with addiction problems. And there are adjustment counselors and trusted administrators and teachers in all of the schools, so that can be a resource and should be. And last, if any parents have concerns and they just want to, they're not sure where to turn to and they want to just start somewhere, please, they can call my office, they can call me, they can call the chief. We can get started with trying to help them.
Great, well said. Well, I'd like to thank our panel today, Essex County District Attorney Jonathan Blodgett. Thank you.
I've been demoted from Attorney General back to DA.
I'm sorry?
So I've been demoted back to District Attorney from Attorney General.
What did I say?
That's what I'm teasing you.
You've been calling him AG the whole show.
I apologize.
No, I'm just teasing you. That's fine.
And our Chief of Police, I didn't demote you, did I?
No, thank
From
you.
Beverly's Chief of Police, John LeLacheur, and our Mayor, Mike Cahill.
Thank you all.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank our viewers for watching. You've been watching City Scene with Mayor Mike Cahill. I'm your host, Walt Kosmowski. Thank you for watching.